Hey guys, it's Debbie Potts, and I am obviously passionate about improving how we age and testing and not guessing to figure out what you, a unique individual, should do, as what works for me might not work for you. My other passion is to help figure out what we need to do to embrace the aging process, not do the same things we did 20 years ago, 10 years ago. Those workout routines, nutrition program might not work as well as it used to. So we need to push pause and reset, recalibrate, course correct when we hit middle age. My goal is to live my best life the second half of my life. So as I turned 50, I started to focus on how do I want to be living life when I am 80. And as my dad passed away at 80 and my mom's now 83 and I'm 53, it's really focusing on what we can do today to be my best self in the future. Part of that is metabolism testing. I invested in PNOE equipment, oh my gosh, 2 years ago, and I'm working hard to build up this business in North San Diego, testing in Solana Beach at Peak Performance Physical Therapy Clinic, and also available to go to groups to offer this testing because it's portable. The challenge is, I don't think people understand how easy this test can be and so much powerful data that we collect from this test. I feel that most people are intimidated by doing a VO2 max test. It sounds horrible. And the truth is, I believe we don't need to do a VO2 max for everyone. Some people may be better off by identifying your peak fat burning zone. What is your zone two we hear about? Most people I see that train think they're in zone two. They're really in zone three and they're not improving their fat burn efficiency. Most people do intervals, but they're doing them completely wrong. They're doing zone three. So similar to what Stacy Sims says, that we're working out too hard to be easy and too easy to be hard. I completely agree with that. And the people I do get to do metabolism testing, we identify that. We identify what are your areas of opportunity, what systems of your body need to be more developed so you can be your best version of yourself. Now, as a nutritional therapy practitioner, and I'm also an FDN practitioner where I'm able to add in functional lab testing, we order through our medical director program. I'm not licensed, but we're able to use our medical director program to order functional lab testing and add this to our whole investigation on what you need to do to be thriving as you age. Quality of life, right? So today I want to go through some notes on the slides of metabolism testing and what information we get from that, knowing that we can do a resting metabolic test and an active metabolism test. What markers I feel that are important to look at and review in the analysis that we do from the data collected, but I add in nutritional therapy assessment, correlating the data here with your 5-day food and mood exercise supplement log, what you're doing now, so I can meet you where you are on your journey and identify where are some action items that you can take. And ideally, next level up would be adding in the functional lab testing or at least a blood chemistry assessment. But really, I'd love to see a Dutch hormone panel, a GI stool test, organic acids test, but for sure, a stool test and hormone test would be powerful to go along with this because we're looking at your metabolic health. We're looking at the role of the mitochondria, fat burn efficiency, metabolic flexibility, and more. Now, we can look at this for longevity, but I also feel it is important to do the testing to identify how well are you at burning fat at rest and during various intensity levels, and identify, are you needing to speed up your metabolism do you need to improve your fat burn efficiency? So that's where we get into the nitty gritty about mitochondria health, but also the pathway between mTOR versus AMPK, the teeter totter that we're in opposition, but we need to have both be stimulated, and we want to increase our aging process being metabolic healthy by looking at not just mitochondria health, fat burn efficiency, but the muscle health and looking at improving our lean body mass and avoiding sarcopenia, the loss of muscle. So it's not just looking at fat burning efficiency. We really want to look at speeding our metabolism up and not slowing it down as we age, and looking at how we can take ownership of our health, course correcting when we have this data we can collect, instead of just guessing this is what I need to do because this is what I read in a book or a social media post or on a YouTube channel. So I've gone over in previous videos mitochondria, metabolic health, how to measure RMR, resting metabolic rate, and AMR, how to improve metabolism, and some final tips. Now, today I want to skip through this, but you can see this in previous videos. Metabolic slowdown. What happens as we age? Loss of muscle mass, hormones changing, lower estrogen, growth hormone, testosterone. That can slow metabolism down. How we can use PNOE metabolism testing to identify, is your resting metabolic rate slower than it should be for your age, height, weight, and gender? Understanding what slows our metabolism down, and when is it appropriate to say, yes, this happens as we age, but understanding our unique metabolic profile to make adjustments in our nutrition, exercise, and lifestyle, and supplement where needed to counteract these declines. In a metabolism test, as I use with PNOE, if your fat burning ability is low, we can figure out how to improve it. If it is mitochondria boosting biogenesis, do we need to improve AMPK pathway with certain nutrients? Do we need to focus your workout program really around your zone 2, your peak fat burning zone, and how you're doing intervals, as well as strength training and recovery? So there's a lot to this, and it's very comprehensive, and I make it even more comprehensive by implementing PNOE metabolism testing into the rest of the work that I do. Now, as I said, nutritional therapy, we're working at nutrient dense whole foods, building up your foundations, mineral balancing, working on the liver health, the adrenals, blood sugar balance, but really looking at lifestyle habits to optimize your health, stress management, sleep, movement, exercise, and supplementing what we need to fill in the gaps that we're missing through our foods, as I'm taking organ capsules because I'm not going to eat organ meat, but I know the benefits of organ capsules, including skin health, taking hyaluronic acid that Dr. William Davis talks about. I'm not going to eat organ meat, but I will wash down 6 capsules from a good source company as Paleo Valley and not have to deal with eating what it is. So magnesium. We need magnesium because we can't not get enough of it through the foods that we eat. And we need so many processes in our body require magnesium. So health optimization, what you need to do is what we look at personalized coaching programs. So metabolic health definitions, we can go back to this, but just to scan through these first ones, catabolism versus anabolism, your basal metabolic rate, how to speed up your metabolism. We've gone through this in the past. I'm just skipping through these. What is metabolic health? What is metabolism? And let's dive into mitochondria function and how important it is with aging. So the mitochondria, we're going to talk to some experts coming up on the podcast that I get to interview on mitochondria health and how we need to support mitochondria as we age, as well as how we can test mitochondria with a new device that came out this year, not too far away from me. So hopefully I can go get it tested because they're just like 10 minutes from where I live, on the ME scan, mitochondria scanning, and nutrient sensing, AMPK versus mTOR, but we're focused on AMPK pathway to help mitochondria activity. So we'll go into mitochondria health a little bit more in the future. And then on the test, when we do metabolism testing, we're looking at mitochondria capacity, more mitochondria to create more ATP, mitochondria density, the number of mitochondria per unit, volume of tissue and muscle cells. So higher mitochondria density indicates greater energy production for sustained activities, as well as more efficient utilization of oxygen and nutrients. Versus mitochondria capacity is the ability of the mitochondria to produce ATP or energy efficiently through oxidative phosphorylation. So we'll talk to Dr. Patel about this. What is mitochondria capacity? Mitochondria density, higher activity of enzymes involved in electron transport chain in the Krebs cycle, the better. So availability of nutrients and oxygen required for ATP production is necessary. So we can get really down rabbit holes about the role of mitochondria. Found these images online, research study, but what happens from youth to middle age to older age, really looking at the role of the mitochondria as we age and how it becomes dysfunctional. And my focus is how we can create balance instead of imbalance, function instead of dysfunction, and avoid disease by having more ease, right? So middle age, compensatory increase due to inefficiency of our mitochondria. This is where I am in my life and my journey, and I'm trying to do everything I can in mid-age age range to improve my older age. Decline mitochondria activity. So instead of saying, hey, this is what happens, age-related cellular dysfunction, today's forward thinking as a health optimizer is looking at this is what happens. So this is what I need to do to make up for the process of aging. I have the need for more antioxidants because I have more reactive oxygen species production. So I have more oxidative stress. So I need to have more antioxidants and avoid damaging my mitochondria, DNA of the mitochondria, and the proteins. So it's really looking at what can we do today to improve our future self. With PNOE metabolism testing, we're getting a lot of data and different markers on the report. So we can see here this older report, they just updated it last fall, but resting metabolic test, we're getting all these markers on the left, and the active metabolism test, we're getting all these markers. So it's not just about VO2 peak, I'd rather say the max, but really look at fat burn efficiency, training zones, your different thresholds, your fuel switches, high intensity performance, how well do you recover from that high intensity, and heart rate variability. So it's a breath analysis when we do PNOE testing, and we can help identify how metabolic healthy are you, comparing that data with your blood chemistry panel and looking at your insulin levels and looking at triglycerides or CRP. So measuring your metabolism with the face mask on, we're looking at oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. So with that, we can identify your fuel source used at rest, fat versus carbohydrates I've talked about, tracking your fat burn efficiency, and then looking at the data we collect on substrate utilization, fat versus carbohydrates, and we look at that as a respiratory exchange ratio. Mitochondria health is really important part of what we're looking at. What influences our fat burning efficiency? Positive effects, these first four: cardiovascular training, sleep, nutrition, sunlight exposure. Then negative factors that impact your fat burning efficiency: processed foods, alcohol consumption, impairs mitochondrial function and fat oxidation. Really important there. I always have people argue, oh, alcohol is healthy for you. The European, Italians, French, they drink alcohol every night. But what goes on really impacting your mitochondria function and fat oxidation, I think, is more of an issue for people. So mitochondria, again, capacity, mitochondria density, enzyme activity, mitochondria biogenesis, and mitochondria efficiency. We can talk to Dr. Patel to explain how he would describe these terms. So mitochondrial dysfunction is what we want to avoid. What happens as we age, to me, means what should we be doing now after 45 years old, age 50, really working on being more insulin sensitive. Fat metabolism should be improved, oxidative capacity, thermogenesis. And this is, think, exercise or calorie restriction stimulating this AMPK pathway. Mitochondria biogenesis, reactive oxygen species is ROS. So then looking at functional mitochondria versus dysfunctional, ATP, the energy currency of our cells, growth, adaptation, biosynthesis, protein modification, mitochondria, communication, thermogenesis. So we'll talk to more experts in this area if you're interested. So when we do the metabolism testing, I'm really looking at heart rate increases as we do the test. If I'm doing a peak fat max, I'm doing 3 to 5 minute stages, as Bob Seebehor teaches, or the metabolism test, a peak VO2 is 1 to 2 minute stages. I prefer to do 2 minute stages until we hit the crossover point, and then 1 minute stages towards the end, because as you get higher intensity, you're not going to be able to hold it for 2 minutes. So I'd rather go slower and then go a little bit faster as we get higher intensities. But this down here, where we're trying to identify where are you burning the most fat, is it here before this line is a warm up? And then where is a crossover point where this carbohydrate usage goes up and the fat usage goes down? So your zone 2 would be before this point to your peak fat burning. And that could be down here in the warm up. And this is what I'm finding with a lot of people who are exercising, but they're exercising incorrectly and not developing their fat burning energy systems. So in the report, we'll get different markers, a whole long report, and I go through it with people to work on what they need to focus on, because there's a lot of information. So exercise metabolism, we're looking at biological versus actual age, looking at your fat burn, and then we can use that data to figure out areas of opportunity. Fuel sources used at various intensities, and then figure out, are you training correctly? I keep talking about this all the time. Zone 2 is down here. You don't need intervals. Zone 3, you're doing it for maybe 10 to 20 minutes, and then your recovery is 4 to 8 minutes. They're pieces. If you're doing top of zone 3, bottom of zone 4, those are longer intervals versus this was tempo. Those are 5 to 10 minute intervals, but your recovery is down in zone 1, 2.5 to 5 minutes. If you're doing medium intervals, they're zone 4. These are 30 to 90 seconds. 30 to 90 seconds recovery. So now we're talking a 1-to-1 ratio. Super important here to understand this. This is where I think so many people train incorrectly. They hear to do HIIT training, but they're doing it 20 minutes. You know, they're not, maybe they're doing 2-minute intervals, but they're not coming down to this zone 1 in between. Their recovery when you're doing sprint interval training is, say, 10 to 30 seconds. Zone 5, the recovery is 20 to 60 seconds. That's 1-to-2 ratio. Does that make sense? So when we're creating a workout program, we need to look at, based on your test data, where you are in this test today, what are your training zones? Do you need all these zones, or do you just need to train in 1 or 2 of them? So we want to look at how well do you burn fat? How we can get that information from the test reports, and then figure out your program, how to improve that, be it oxidation, mitochondria, how to use fat for fuel. It's oxidative phosphorylation is the word. So we want to look at what fuel source down here on the far right is your zone 2 training. So those training for endurance events ideally are spending time in their peak fat training zone. Where are you burning the most fat and staying under that metabolic crossover point? So if I move my picture out of the way, you can see acetyl-CoA creatine, phosphocreatine, oxygen, creatine kinase, ATP. So if you look at the far right, we're working on oxidative phosphorylation. And look at the mitochondria are here. They're using fats. Beta oxidation goes through the Krebs cycle, and that creates lots of ATP. If we were using glucose, goes through pyruvate into acetyl-CoA Krebs cycle, it creates ATP, but not as much. And then when we're using glucose without oxygen, so non-oxidative phosphorylation, we're getting ATP, but not as many. So this is why when we're training for endurance events, we want to develop that fat burning engine, so to speak, and get faster and faster at that peak fat burning zone. What people tend to do is train in that zone 3, that it's, say, 50-50 carbs and fat, or more carbohydrates, less fat, because we're staying. Zone 2 would be the top of zone 2 is the metabolic crossover point. And you can see there's not all or none your fuel source. So you are burning lots of fat here, a little bit of fat to here, and then at the high end, free ATP, stored ATP for quick energy system, creatine phosphate. This is why we need creatine if we're doing heavy lifting and sprint training. As Stacey Sims talks about for women, we really need to add that creatine, but also for the brain health. And then if you're doing more that, say, 1 to 2 minute intervals, 400-meter run, a boxing, power, short duration, you are using more glucose. Great chart. Respiratory exchange ratio, we're looking at your fat to carbohydrate fuel source, and then looking at zone 2 training versus doing HIIT training or sit training. Looking at genetics, I can do that with clients if they do, say, the DNA company, looking at any genetic SNPs that maybe you have need for more support for AMPK, or do you need more mTOR, influencing factors on your VO2 max, genetics. So we can dive into that. Now, what I want to finish with today is just looking at exercise intensity, figure out your zoning, looking at a fuel source used, and how to match your fueling with your training. So when we're doing the training zones, we get the report back, figure out your 5 training zones is what we use, and figure out how to spend or create a workout program based on the data collected. Strength training versus HIIT training. Whoops, I'm going the wrong way. So we have zone 1, zone 2, develops that mitochondria function. Zone 3, more that tempo. Zone 4, lactate byproduct used for fuel by your muscles. And then zone 5 improves your VO2 max, peak output. But remember, it's not even 62 minutes. I think that's more zone 4. To me, zone 5 is a sprint interval training. But remember the 1-to-2 ratio recovery. So we can see the fuel sources changing as we go higher intensity. And again, intervals, recovery time is key. What are some research-based recommendations? We can go into that. Remember, not looking at percentage, because when we do testing, we know what you are heart rate range. So it's not percentage, your max heart rate. We are identifying with science, not mathematical equation, what your heart rate intensity will be based on fuel source used in the test. So there are samples of HIIT protocol, 4 to 6 times, 30 seconds all out, 4 minutes of recovery. That was one study. That increased muscle oxidative capacity and exercise performance. And then another study showed 10 times 1 minute cycling with 1 minute recovery between intervals. So 1 minute on, 1 minute off, 3 times a week. That improved mitochondria function and insulin sensitivity. Strength training. What are some examples? They showed some resistance training 2 to 3 times a week, improved mitochondria biogenesis in older adults. Full body resistance training, say leg press, bench press in a row. So back, a push, and a pull. 3 sets. So 8 to 12 is not what we do probably these days, but improves muscle strength, mitochondrial content, and metabolic health. And then a combination, strength and cardio, one study, and this is in 2017, helped improve mitochondrial function, overall fitness, 30 minutes of aerobic exercise, so zone 2 perhaps, with 30 minutes of strength training 3 times a week, increased mitochondria adaptations and physical performance increased. So you can look at all these different references to learn more. So how can you boost your mitochondria? Through your exercise as well as nutrition. If you are fit and active athlete, you might want to not do so much fasting as you're doing high intensity interval training. But what my argument is that most people are not doing correct intensity for interval training to get the boost of your mitochondria. So we want to look at supplements, as we talked to Vera Trim with Dr. Kyle, or you're doing interval training you can do with blood flow restrictor bands. We'll talk about that on our next follow-up call. But really looking at lifestyle habits of stress management, sleep, exercise type, duration, intensity. So looking at what you can do to create metabolic harmony, testing and not guessing, and make sure we add in this functional lab testing, figuring out what's best for you to improve where your areas of opportunity are. Do you need fat loss? Do you need to improve performance? Do you need to improve your markers to increase lifespan, quality of life? Looking at how chronic stress impacts the whole you, and looking at longevity markers as VO2 max, but also muscle mass, looking at much more. So looking at all these different elements, I say, is the holistic method combined with functional medicine lab testing. So if you want to learn more, head to debbiepotts.net and send me an email if you have questions. So thanks for listening for my little video today on how to improve your metabolic health and your mitochondria, and test and not guess. So let me know if you want to come out to Solana Beach, North San Diego, and have a metabolic test and correlate the data with all the other intake forms that we can do to figure out how you should fuel train to perform your best in life today and in your second half of your life. Thanks for sharing with others who might be interested.